Design thinking is a mindset. It's a way to solve problems with people. So you might have a particular challenge that you're trying to build a solution for. And in order to build that solution, you have to work with the people who are directly affected by the issue or the challenge. So you work with those people to co-design a solution.
I remember reading about design thinking and feeling like I had just discovered the secret of like, how do you unlock the ability to see things that others cannot see? They had taken the process of creativity and innovation and really had a process. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's a process. It's something that you can actually learn and actually teach to others versus, oh, it's only Steve Jobs can do that, or only the special people can be innovators. We're all creative. We're born that way. Design thinking is just a way to make sure we don't lose it. Unfortunately, over time, it just happens. The more we learn, the more we get educated, the more experience we have. Those things actually we lean on. And we kind of let go of that squishy stuff called creativity and innovation, right? It's I don't know about that, but I can definitely look up a theory, I can look up a formula, and that's solid, right? And so what happens over time is that's what we lean on, or the experiences we have over our careers, or the titles that we get. But then we let go of that muscle. We stop using that muscle called our creativity and intuition and all of that good stuff that we're born with. So design thinking is a way to keep that from dying. And so that's why it's like we want teachers to teach it, learn it, and then teach their kids and students so that when they go through all the whatever career they go through, they become engineers or scientists or whatever, that they always remember that that's a core element of what makes you human and what makes you especially special is that part. It's that part of you. It's like creativity.
When I've seen schools train lots of educators in design thinking, or schools take on design thinking as a philosophical tool that they'll all use, it changes the fabric of the school culture. The school itself then approaches really hairy and audacious challenges with a sense of adventure and resiliency. We just talked to an educator who talked about their school being designed through design thinking and finding themselves now in a different place in their development. But because their founding was through a design thinking process, they're ready to reinvent themselves, and in fact, expecting to reinvent themselves through this process. A second reason that design thinking for teachers is really important at a classroom level is it's one of the key tools for students to drive their own learning. Design thinking done well is student-driven. It's students not only addressing, finding solutions, but identifying the challenges.
I've seen design thinking used in the classroom where students were trying to figure out how to clean up a local water supply. So students were actually building implements to try and extract, toxins from the water. There have been more lofty challenges, like we have to feed however many millions of people in the year 2050. How do we do it? But I think that some of the best design challenges are local. They're place-based, and they're those where you can partner with someone who is familiar with the challenge. At one school that I worked at, we had a major design challenge theme. So it might be a question like, how do we move products faster, farther, and more efficiently? And so one team might say, well, I'm going to work on how we can make traffic go faster on highways, or I'm going to work on how we get people through airport security faster. So they might take on different facets of the same major theme and figure out like how they want to define their challenge and slim it down to one particular manageable challenge. The design thinking process starts with empathizing. You have to find a challenge, or maybe you're presented with a challenge, you have to really sit inside that challenge and figure out, how does it feel to be faced with whatever issue it is. So that requires you to ask purposeful questions. It requires you to be non-judgmental. It requires you to really think about what it's like to experience this challenge and how you might be able to help. So depending on the project, they might have a student read firsthand accounts of what it's like to experience a particular problem. Or they might take a student to a particular space where the student can see a challenge in action. So there are so many different entry points to the empathy space, just trying to figure out what it is like to experience this challenge, or what impact this challenge is having on a person or an environment. Oftentimes you go and you shadow, you just sit and you look around, you observe, you're going on a fact-finding mission. So it's not only the empathy interview, but it's also just sitting and noticing. It teaches students to go out, ask purposeful questions that matter, to find information that they can use to help other people. And I think that that's just such a beautiful way to teach students to think about the world. Like, how can you be of service in the world? And it starts with asking purposeful questions and caring enough to craft questions that are going to yield information that can help you build a product that will change the world. The next part of the process is to define the problem, which means you are figuring out who your users are. So you're defining who your users are. You're stripping down the problem to its main elements. You're figuring out what the constraints might be. You're figuring out what the major pain points are, and you're making decisions about what parts of the challenge you want to address, or how even you're going to frame the challenge. The way that I've seen it work is that typically students are grouped up, because thinking through problems together, you're trying to collaborate, and so that's part of the learning process. And so students are making decisions together, and they're using each other's perspectives to try and see all sides of the problem. A classroom might take on the same challenge, and they might have the same problem defined the same way, and just come up with different products based on the empathy interviews that they have conducted and the way that they decide to come at the problem. The next part of the process is for students to ideate. This is the time when they're throwing out their wild ideas, and wild in terms of this may not have been done before. And so this is the time where you have everyone just throw out all their ideas, and you engage in yes and thinking. And so you're not saying, oh gosh, no, that's not gonna work because, no, that's not gonna work because. This is the time where you become a little more disciplined in saying that we're gonna leave all options on the table, and we are going to consider all possibilities at first. And then we're gonna look at our constraints and figure out, like, okay, which of these do we wanna take off the table? Which of these do we think have wheels, have potential? And so there's a great deal of convergent and divergent thinking going on in that stage. So the next step of the process is prototyping. This is the time where we take one or more of our ideas and we develop them into a testable form. So we might, if we're developing an app, we might begin mock-ups, trying to figure out, like, how might the app work? How might it help? Or we might actually be building something, like physically, like putting things together so that people can see, and so that it can be, parts of it can be tested.
The major learning happens when students get feedback on their product and then iterate the product or service using that feedback, and then get more feedback on the product and iterate it again. It's in the multiple stages of iteration and feedback that the learning actually happens. So when I work with educators and on design thinking, I always encourage them to go through the cycle and do at least 2 iterations on the feedback and the redesign, because that's where we find the most powerful learning.
One of the beautiful things about design thinking is just teaching students how to manage failure. You are going to fail at something, or parts of your prototype may not work. And so the important thing is to iterate, figure out what's not going right and fix it and make it better for next time, and figure out what you can learn from that circumstance. Students can always go back and tweak and make their products better. And I think one of the best parts of this is when you get a student that the time has run out, the feedback has been given, the exhibition has happened, and that student is still thinking about the problem and still trying to iterate and coming back to you and saying, look, I improved upon my design, and there's no obvious payoff for them right away. But that's when you know that you've had an impact in that way. One of the ways that you can help students is to walk them through the questions that they're asking. So don't write their questions for them, but talk to them about whether their questions are purposeful. Because sometimes as adults, we assume that students will know what questions to ask. They know what they're looking for, but they may not know how to get that information. So I think actually having students review the questions either as peers or with the teacher themselves is a great way to ensure that they are iterating there as well. If a teacher were to spend more time on one thing as opposed to another, I would say that spending time in the empathy interviewing part is really important. It teaches students to ask really important questions, which I think is one of the most important transferable skills that my students have gotten out of design thinking as a whole. There are a couple ways that things can go off the rails, which is fine, it's all a learning process. And I think that number one is with the empathy interviewing. If you decide that you see the challenge and you already have a thought as to what the answer should be or what the solution should be, you're going down the wrong path because you are discounting what your users can offer, and that discounting mentality, that discounting what they have to offer is going to continue throughout your process. It cuts you off from their knowledge and their insights, and then it sort of dooms you to creating an inferior product or an inferior solution in many cases. Another way that it can go off the rails is going too far down that path. I always give students the example of the Homer car. There is a car that on The Simpsons that Homer Simpson built, and the issue was that the designers gave him too much control. They allowed him to design a car, and so he designed his perfect car, and it was really ugly to everyone else and not functional for everyone else. So I think finding the right balance is really important. So this process teaches students that you have to be a designer and you have to have the right ratio. So it's not prudent to control everything without having input from the people for whom with whom you're designing. It's also not prudent to have the users design the product. You are the designer, so you have to know your role.
For those who've never done the process, right, they'll go, I got these really tough teachers, and I've got we got the worst students. They're flunking school. They are unruly. They're not going to be in school much longer. They're going to get kicked out. And I said, those teachers and those students, they're going to do really well with this process. See, that process of wanting to be great and amazing and creative, it's actually built into us. We've just stuffed it down and stopped it from coming up. And all I'm doing is kind of reawakening that, right? Using the process to kind of reawaken that. And I think what makes it exciting is because when we do the process, you're actually outwardly focused. You're trying to design something for somebody else, not you. So the natural part of it is we're human, so we want to connect. Even though we're like, I'm just cranky old dude, I don't want to talk to anybody. But you know what? When they start doing this process, the cranky old dudes are not cranky old dudes or the cranky old ladies or the kids who are out of control. They're like massively creative, massively innovative. They're like blowing my mind all the time.
Real good design thinking takes time, specifically if you're going to go through this full cycle and multiple iterations. And I think it's really important to do that for the educator to get comfortable with design thinking and for students to actually grow in that mindset, a design thinking mindset, a solutionary mindset. So that time commitment is necessary, but not always available. So one of the limitations of design thinking is feeling like we need to go through the whole cycle every time. Each of the steps of design thinking has protocols and strategies that can be used outside of the entire cycle. So for example, an empathy interview is a really powerful small nugget from design thinking that we can use at any point in a unit. It doesn't have to be part of a full design thinking cycle.
I'm very afraid that our students or the young generation now, we don't know what kind of jobs they'll have or careers, and we can't define it because of technology. So I am certain that if they used or implemented a new design thinking, it wouldn't matter what the careers are 20 years from now, they'd still be able to function successfully by using and knowing design thinking. If you think about every career, you're doing some kind of serving. So how well are you going to serve people? I want our kids to learn to be empathetic first, to serve others first, listen, and then help them. And this design thinking process is exactly the thing that I want our students to learn, because that's going to make them successful in life when they have a career and they know how to serve and they know how to create solutions for the people.